Oh, we're live.
Hey.
Hey, everybody. You ready to go first tonight, Angela?
I can if you would like, Howie.
Why don't you? So I don't steal your thunder, because when we talked before, I think you're going to cover some of the same ground I will. So I'll just try to fill in a few gaps if there are any.
You're probably going to cover it like way more accurately than I am. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday live stream with Howie Hawkins and myself, Angela Walker, and my dog Dita. We're hoping, y'all had a good rest of your week last week, and that your this week is off to a fairly decent start with everything happening in the world. I think here at the top, we were just gonna touch off with the fact that, Joe Biden, as expected by many of us on the left, is not prioritizing the needs of the American people. The big bone in my craw is his insistence on recognizing Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela, which is that's not it. The folks got together and democratically elected Nicolas Maduro. That's their president. And, this last administration decided they would install this puppet, and for Biden to continue that is not the way we want to be working with countries, particularly in Latin America, Africa, Asia. We absolutely don't want to continue meddling in other people's democracies. So, yeah. And Howie, I know that like we just said, you're going to cover that way more comprehensively than I am. But I have a soft spot for Nicolas Maduro personally. He's democratically elected. He's a socialist, and also a bus driver. So I've been a Maduro stan since he drove up to accept whatever in his bus. So I got a soft spot. Howie?
Well, the thing that concerns me about Biden is he's not for getting rid of the filibuster, which means he's handing to McConnell and the Republicans the ability to veto even the modest reforms that require legislation that Biden wants to institute. So those survival checks that people need, we want them to be $2,000 and monthly, but they're going $1,400 one time. We may not even get that. So there's a whole lot of legislation that is pending. And if that filibuster, which is a legacy of Jim Crow, it's how the Southern Dixiecrats prevented civil rights legislation for generations. And it's how they prevented, the Obama administration from getting some of its legislation through. I mean, it was total obstruction. And what we're looking at is more of the same. And Biden doesn't have a game plan to take that away from them, which means the Democrats don't deliver. People are hurting economically, and then the right mobilizes around its nativist and racist and conspiracy scapegoating. And they're, half the country almost voted for Trump. Most of those people think the election was a fraud. I mean, they're living in an alternate reality. And the best way to change that is to change the real reality, where people who feel economically insecure, have lost jobs or businesses or are afraid they will, to see that, this administration delivered for them. And it looks like they're just going to throw in the towel. I mean, that's what it looks like right now. We had a 55-45 vote today on whether impeachment was even legal. And a majority of senators said 55, they voted against the proposal from Rand Paul to say, stop the impeachment because you can't impeach a private citizen. And 5 of the Republicans voted with the Democrats no on that. But to impeach Trump, convict Trump, they need 12 more Republicans to come across. Now, maybe the evidence will be so outrageous that they will when the trial comes, which is starts February 9th, but we'll see. So, there have been some executive orders on a lot of things that, are good in themselves. Most of them repealing stuff Trump did. That's good. But there's other legislation that even with the filibuster, we got to watch out for. There's a bill called HR1, which is a sort of omnibus voting and ethics and campaign finance piece of legislation. And it's got three divisions. Voting, it's good. It promotes a lot of things like internet registration and same-day voter registration, and limits voter purging by interstate cross-checking. And it provides for voter-verified permanent paper ballots. And the exact language is the term individual durable voter-verified paper ballot means a paper ballot marked by hand by the voter, or a paper ballot marked through the use of a non-tabulating ballot marking device or system. And that should only be for people with certain disabilities. So long as the voter shall have the option to mark his or her ballot by hand. I testified last week before the New York State Board of Election, which is considering one of these black box voting machines, actually several pieces of equipment. Most of New York voting was by hand ballots, with certain people with disabilities being able to use ballot marking devices, but they had a paper ballot they were able to examine before it went into the scanner. And that's a paper trail that can be audited and recounted. That's the gold standard, and it'd be terrible for New York to go backwards. And if they do this piece of legislation, the Division A of HR1 on voting would make those devices, it would basically ban them. It's got early voting, voting by mail, not universal voting by mail, but no excuse absentee ballot, says they don't require notarization. That's all great. And then there's Division C, which is ethics, and there's a lot of good reforms there. But the thing that should concern us is Division B, which is on campaign finance. And what it does, I'll start with the presidential primary matching funds program, which we raise enough money in the right amounts to qualify for. The Greens have done that the last 3 elections. Major party candidates mostly don't use it because if you accept that money, you're limited to spending $50 million. That's what it was this year on your primary. And for those major party corporate candidates, that's not enough. So what this would do is, instead of what we had to do, get $5,000 in 20 states and contributions of $250 or less, they will increase that 5-fold to $25,000 from 20 states. And the maximum contribution that counts is $200 instead of $250, which means you need a lot more people to donate to reach those thresholds. So they're increasing 5-fold the ability to get in. And then instead of a presidential primary matching fund system, and then a general election fund, which is an equal grant to every candidate that qualifies, which the major party candidates haven't used since Obama decided not to in 2008. McCain had to because he didn't have enough money. Since then, they've ignored that. That's what that 5% we always talk about would qualify the Green Party for. If we got over 5%, we would get that grant, which is prorated between 5% and 25% of what was about $100 million this year. So if we just got 5%, we would have had $20 million to run in 2024. But that will be out if this passes. And what it does is, and if you took that grant, you couldn't spend private money. You just spend public money. So it wouldn't be the legalized bribery of private campaign contributions. Well, what this new law does is it eliminates those limits, the $50 million for the primary and none for the general if you take the grant. So you're going to have a system of public campaign financing that only the major party candidates can qualify for because its threshold is so high. And then they can raise as much private money and spend as much private money as they want. And that doesn't even get to the super PAC money. Well, a lot of that money being dark money that we don't know where it came from, because they give it to a 501c4, which doesn't have to report their contributors. And then the 501c4 passes it on to the super PAC, and the super PAC says it got it from the 501c4. you don't know where that money originally came from. So this is basically aimed at the Green Party, which is the last party that uses this public campaign financing system. And so that is something that should be excised from HR1. And then they have, this would also apply to congressional candidates. The threshold is you got to raise $50,000 in contributions of 200 or less. And that money is matched 6-to-1, as is the presidential matching funds program. Right now, it's a match of 1-to-1. Now, the problem there, when you have a 6-to-1 match, or with any matching fund system, is that the candidates already got the most money, the big party candidates. Say, these numbers wouldn't even qualify for Congress, but I've got them in my head. You're a green and you raise $10,000 that qualifies for matching. Match is 6-to-1, you got 70,000. And you're running against a Democrat or Republican that's got 100,000 that qualify for matching. That get matched 7-to-1. They got $700,000. So the difference between when you started of $90,000 grows to $630,000. So this is a system of so-called public financing added on top of unlimited private financing, and only the major party candidates will be able to take advantage of it. So this is how they play the game. It's a reform that doesn't reform. They're going to call it public campaign financing, and what it's going to be is public subsidies for the corporate candidates. And upstarts like the Green Party will have a hell of a time qualifying. So that's HR1. It's a big concern among Greens. And ironically, maybe our best hope for this not getting through is that the Republicans will stop it because we didn't get rid of the filibuster. And then the last thing I'll talk about is I participated in a news conference today about bail reform here in New York. And you all may have heard of a case of Khalif Browder. He was a young man that 13, 14 years old, was accused of stealing a backpack in the Bronx. And he said he didn't do it. And they made his bail so high his family couldn't meet it. So he was put on Rikers Island for 3 years. He got beat up by the guards. He got beat up by gangs in there. He ended up in solitary confinement for 2 of the 3 years that he spent there. The kid came out damaged, and about 2 years after he got out, hung himself. He committed suicide. But when he got out because the DA finally brought it to trial and said, we don't have any evidence. And they just freed this kid after he'd been in there for 3 years. That's what the bail system does. You know, somebody like Paul Manafort or Roger Stone and those people, they get charged, they make bail, and they're walking around. And if you're poor, they put a bail on you that you can't meet. Now, because of the Khalif Browder case and a lot of work by a lot of people in New York State, Green candidates, Khalif's brother Akeem ran for mayor of New York City in 2017 with bail reform as his leading issue. So we got a law passed in New York in 2019 that said you can't impose bail for a lot of offenses. And in more serious felony offenses, you can impose bail. But the purpose of bail is to make sure the accused shows up for court hearings. Instead, and this is what people testified here in Syracuse to, these are families whose children have been given exorbitant bail they could never meet before their cases go to trial. Now, if somebody in the evaluation of the judge is a threat to public safety, you don't use bail to keep them in jail. You say, we're going to keep you in the court till we go to trial because of the circumstances of what you're accused of doing, and maybe your record and your experience. But that's not what they're doing. So that news conference, we'll have it up on the Facebook page. I'll write a little explanation of it. But at least New York did bail reform. The problem is you get a law passed and then getting it implemented. Getting the law passed is only half the battle. And this is a community, Syracuse, greater Syracuse, where, we have police brutality, but we also have criminal justice system brutality. That's the other side of what goes on once the police arrest you. So that's a big issue. And, there was a lot of protests and demonstrations this summer, but, things moved on to the election and not much has changed. And this news conference I participated in, if you look at it, you'll hear these people talking about what happened to their kids. You realize there's still a lot of work to still be done. So that's what's on my mind.
Math UDX. Well, you can't have a democracy with elections. Elections have always been oligarchic in nature. An actual democracy is when public officials are selected by lot, not by elections.
Yeah, that's true. That goes back to Aristotle. You know, he said a representative republic is an oligarchic form or an aristocratic form of government. And, you know, the American Revolution, the cradle of it, the engine of it, were actually town meetings in New England and committees formed by the lower class folks, the independent farmers, the mechanics, the artisans, the journeymen, the servants. And during the revolution, there was like a revolution within the revolution where, you know, the merchants and the planters wanted independence from Britain for their own economic reasons. And they couched it in democracy, Declaration of Independence. And the working classes took that to heart and forced their way into political power. If you follow, every state was a little different. But then after the Independence War was won, there was basically a counter-revolution. That was the U.S. Constitution, which is set up, and you can read this from Madison, to basically thwart the will of what they called the mob, the masses, the riffraff, so that the wealthy elites could rule. And so there's a lot of limitations to our constitutional system. And I'm for a democracy where you have citizen assemblies like town meetings that govern local communities by direct democracy. And then they elect officials, or like in Athens in ancient Greece, most of those officials were elected by lot, selected by lot. So they rotated in and out of these positions. The only people they elected were military commanders. And so I think there's a lot to speak for that. You know, we talk about community control of the police, and the way the Black Panther Party put that forward is we elect a police commission. But some advocates have lately said, let's just select them by lot, because that'll truly represent the community by random selection better than an election where the police unions and the real estate industry and everybody's weighing in with their extra dollars and influence. So I think that's a discussion. The Greens talk about grassroots democracy. To me, that's citizen assemblies. And then the larger areas of jurisdiction and coordination, those representatives from the assembly should be instructed and recallable, so that when there are important decisions to be made, it's the grassroots makes a decision, and the representatives or delegates carry forward the positions of the grassroots, and they negotiate at the next level.
Hey, Jasmine. Jasmine Phillips wants to know, what can be done on an individual level to address HR1? Letter writing to representatives?
Yes, I think everybody should write their representatives and explain these issues. I'm going to write an op-ed based on what I talked about earlier. That might be helpful. I think use your social media and make people aware of it. I think we should say HR1 does have a lot of good voting rights kind of reforms in it, but the campaign finance system needs to be dropped, at least separated, so we can have a real discussion about public campaign finance. This matching fund system has been put forward by elites over the last decade to replace what progressives used to call and used to advocate called a clean money system, where everybody that qualifies by demonstrating a reasonable level of support with $5 contributions in a petition, then they get an equal campaign grant. So it's a level playing field. And that was adopted in Arizona and in Maine for state elections. And it's been going in those states for a long time. And the politicians actually like it, even the Republicans, because they much rather just get their grant and do their campaign than sit on the phone all day begging for money. So and it's a level playing field. I think that's the kind of public campaign finance system we should advocate.
Chris Olinsky. Speaking of elections, how are the ballot access lawsuits going with the Greens and the Libertarians? Cuomo moving those thresholds for access and petitions is clearly an attempt to end democracy and choice. Good God, is it?
Yeah, he aimed at the Green Party. He didn't say so before the election, but when we lost our ballot line and the Working Families Party and the Conservatives kept theirs, he said, that's what we were aiming for. We set the threshold so those parties would survive. Now, those parties routinely cross-endorse the Working Families Party, the Democrats, the Conservatives, the Republicans. So what we got is a 4-party, 2-candidate system. So it looks like a multi-party democracy, but you have 2 candidates at best. And in a lot of these districts, because of gerrymandering, they're 1-party districts, and sometimes the other major party doesn't even put up a candidate. So it was aimed at the Green Party, and I think, we got 5% running against Cuomo in 2014. He hasn't forgot that. Working Families Party always endorses him and puts him on their ballot line. They never take votes from him. We did. So how are the lawsuits going? They're in process. I'm actually giving a deposition to the lawyers representing the state tomorrow morning, filed an affidavit. So we're going through the process, seeing if we can get this law thrown out as being unconstitutionally a barrier to access to the ballot. And we'll see how that goes. If we don't succeed, we have to get 45,000 signatures in 6 weeks in 2022 to get back on the ballot. And then we have to get over 3 times the amount of votes we used to have to get. It used to be 50,000 votes, and you get a ballot line running for governor. Now you got to do it every 2 years instead of every 4 years for president, governor, president, governor. And the law says 130,000 votes or 2%, whichever is greater. Well, 2% is greater. In the election we just had, it was 173,000 votes. And the Green Party has run a lot of candidates statewide. We've only twice exceeded 173,000. That was me in 2014 running for governor when we got 5%. And it was Ralph Nader running for president in 2000. So this barrier is extremely difficult to overcome. And the petitioning requirement is about the most difficult in the country. Texas, although the Greens have a ballot line now, is 70,000 in 12 weeks. We got to get 45,000 in 6 weeks. So we actually have to get more signatures at a faster pace in a shorter time. And so, we're all up in arms about Republican voter suppression, which we should be. But party suppression is a form of voter suppression that the Democrats practice. They practiced it against us, knocking us off the ballot in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Montana. And, their excuse is, well, your people would vote for our people if you weren't on the ballot, which isn't even true. Most of our voters would stay home if we weren't on the ballot. We know from the exit polls in 2016 that 61% of Jill Stein's voters, the Green Party presidential candidate that year, would have, told the exit pollsters, if she wasn't on the ballot, I wouldn't be here voting. So we bring new voters to the polls, and you suppress us, you suppress the vote.
Hey, JS2. Hope you're having a good week so far, friend. Question for Howie and Angela. Would you support forming a global governing body as a check on the UN? I saw that in the chat. I thought it was an interesting question.
Well, what kind of global governing body? Maybe the approach should be to reform the UN so that you don't have permanent members of the Security Council that can veto, where you have voting in the assembly that's more proportional. There have been a lot of proposals. And then the other thing is, once they adopt a measure or a position, getting it enforced. So that's a very difficult problem. And I would say even more important than reforming the UN is getting rid of capitalism, because that sets up competition between capitalist states for cheap labor, resources, geopolitical, military positioning, resources, markets, and that competition can lead to war. And that competition means they're not looking to work with each other to improve both sides. They're looking to gain at the other's expense. And that is what drives so much of the international conflict we have. So I'm not sure you can have a UN that's reformed that can effectively do the things it needs to do to keep the peace and provide services like the World Health Organization or UNICEF or the World Food Organization when you have a capitalist world, a dog-eat-dog world where each state is trying to get ahead of the other state. So I think that we need to look deeper than the UN.
I just saw this in the chat. David McCarty, welcome. I stayed home. Greens earned my vote, not the guy who is not Trump. So I'd be interested to know if you stayed, we must not have been on the ballot where you were, which happened in quite a few states. So we appreciate you. And yeah, I mean, you just proved our point with that. Like, people who really want a choice. I mean, people like my aunt, my family has always voted Democrat, but question, what we were being offered. And when we were pushed off the ballot in Wisconsin, where my family is, my aunt was really, really upset. And I think it brought home to a lot of people that we really do not have a democracy when you are suppressing parties. So, yeah, that's thank you for underscoring our point. The people that show up for us, that the Democrats assume if we weren't there would come for them, they don't. So we appreciate you making that point. Kira, hey boo. This is for you, Howie. How can the Green Party chip away at these unfair restrictions placed on us unfairly by our competition?
Well, we do it at two levels. Each state has its own election laws. So you can work on getting legislation to have more fair ballot access. And people need to understand how difficult it is in this country compared to most democracies around the world to get on the ballot. If you want to run as an independent for Congress in this country, in New York State, it's 3,500 signatures. In Illinois, it's over 15,000 signatures. In Georgia, it's over 20,000. In Alabama, it's over 40,000. 30,000. In Indiana, it's over 40,000. If you want to run as an independent for the House of Commons in the UK, it's 10 signatures. You want to run for the Congress in India, the world's largest electoral democracy, it's 2 signatures. It's 2 signatures in New Zealand. It's 50 in Australia. It's 100 up in Canada, or 50 in rural ridings. Ridings are their districts. And here it's thousands and tens of thousands. So that's how bad it is. What we really need is a federal law that says for federal elections, there's a universal standard that's reasonable. Like the UK, 10 signatures. We usually don't have too many candidates. More often, we don't have enough candidates. We have thousands of races in this country, not just local races, but state legislature and some in Congress, where there's only one candidate. They run unopposed. So that's, have too many candidates is not the problem right now. But so anyway, to answer your question, work on your state legislation and let's get somebody in Congress to sponsor a federal bill for a federal election standard that's fair, for fair ballot access. I remember Ralph Nader pointing to the ACLU making a piece of model legislation for that in 1940. And Richard Winger at Ballot Access News told me about a congressperson or senator that proposed that back in the 80s. It just hadn't been an issue. It's an issue, people like the Greens got to make an issue.
Jordan Yanowitz, and if it's Yanovich, correct me. I butcher y'all's names sometimes. Thoughts on the deep ecology side of the modern radical ecology movement?
Well, I haven't kept up on the literature of deep ecology really since the 80s. And I'm trying to remember I think he was a Norwegian who came up with the term. And I actually debated him at Worcester College in Ohio. And to him, deep ecology was more a metaphor. It was basically for the social and human implications of ecology. So there was a big debate back then between social ecology and deep ecology. And the deep ecologists were associated with a conservative wing of Earth First that was misanthropic, Malthusian, and Murray Bookchin, who advocated social ecology, got in a big debate with them. And, basically said, if we're going to reharmonize humanity with nature, we got to reharmonize human with human, because the same attitudes and institutions that justify the exploitation of human by human justify the misuse and abuse of nature. And I'm forgetting his name, but the founder of deep ecology, the guy that coined the name, said, that's deep ecology too. So that's kind of where I stopped reading the literature, because it seemed to be more like a metaphor. Ecology has implications, and everybody had their own spin on it. And the modern radical ecology movement, like I said, I haven't been reading that literature since probably the early 90s or late 80s. So that's the best I can tell you. Although I would recommend everybody go back and read Murray Bookchin's 1964 essay called Ecology and Revolutionary Thought, which I think still lays out the radical implications once you understand ecology and how it interacts with human society.
Matthew DX, in your wildest dreams, what would be the ideal structure of the Green Party? And I'm gonna definitely lob this to you, being like, the Green Party OG. You founded this, so.
Well, I think it'd be very similar to what the way the Socialist Party was structured in the early part of the 20th century. It was a mass party of dues-paying members organized into local branches. So it was self-financed. The members had to agree to principles, and they would, make when it came to elections, designate their candidates. And as the primary system came in, it came in the teens and 20s, they would then have to make sure their designated candidate won the primary. And I think the advantages of that is right now the Green Party is basically a coalition of state ballot lines, and some of the parties are organized, some are basically paper parties. And they allocate delegates to the National Committee and the National Convention based on proxies for living, breathing people. Like, how many candidates did you run? How many votes did you get? How many signatures did you get? How many people are registered? But not every state keeps a registration list. So those states, how many dues paying members have you got, or how many people just sign up on your website? It's apples to oranges. So you get weird results, and the living, breathing members who are actually active don't have a direct line to their representatives. So I would rather see it, based on locals that then, get together at the state level and elect their delegations proportional to the membership they have in each state. I think that'd be more democratic. The dues would provide a financial base for the whole party. And the interesting thing, back in right after World War I, the Socialists elected 5 members to the New York State Assembly. And they were not seated because they were anti-war. And the Democrats and Republicans said they were traitors and whatnot. So they called a new special election to replace these people. And the people in their districts reelected these socialists. And they still weren't seated. But to justify themselves, they formed a joint committee between the Assembly and the Senate. And it's like 5,000 pages. You can find it on Google, books. And they go through all the radical movements around the world, from Sri Lanka to Serbia to New York State. When you get to New York State, when it gets to the Socialist Party, it says, this is not a political party, it's an organization. Literally, it says that because the Socialist Party had members, and they had to agree to certain principles. And what the Democrats and Republicans, they said the primary system, which basically says which primary you can vote in. They don't want the working class organized. They want them atomized. And to them, a political party is a brand that you get to look at the primary. And that's all you got. Whereas the Socialist Party, you had, you could join a local party, go to meetings, get educated, make decisions on what your activities are going to be, on who your candidates would be, on who your officers would be. Very different than the Democrats and Republicans. So I just found it striking that, the indictment of the Socialist Party in New York is that they were organized. So that's, unfortunately, the Green Party kind of mimicked what the way the Democrats and Republicans are organized by basically just following, our members are the people that enroll in the party, where I guess 27 states allow that, 23 don't. And then you got to sort of guess who your members are. And we should have a real mass membership party. And people who are members of it should make a reasonable dues contribution and agree to our basic principles. I think that's the kind of structure we need.
Jennifer, that's our homie. And before I jump into this question, I just wanted to, because I see it in the chat, Marcella Marie, we are sending you the biggest hug. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for being here with us tonight. And yeah, I mean, we have the best interests of working folks and plain folks and at heart, because that's basically who we are too. So, every policy that we advocate for, everything that was in our platform, these are things that also benefit us. So we're in the same boat, and just want to give you love tonight. Back to the homie Jennifer. Hello to you two. Hey, sweetheart. Where are we on this vaccine? I'm seeing all kinds of stuff about vaccines. I've seen where, just thinking like local, because I give blood, and one of the things that came up here is if you get a vaccine other than the Pfizer vaccine or is it Moderna vaccine, like something outside of that, you will have a problem giving blood. As long as if you take the vaccine, you're somebody that gets, one of those two vaccines, you can give blood. So you got these competing things on vaccines. And as far as and clarify for me, Jennifer, are you asking like where we stand on the vaccine, or, what we would tell people about taking it, or which? How are you interpreting that, Howie?
Well, I'm thinking Trump didn't order enough vaccines and Biden just ordered them. And it's going to take 6 months to get them produced. And now we got these new mutated variants of the COVID virus that are believed to be more contagious. And one of them, I think, either out of Brazil or South Africa, may be more deadly. So we are in this for at least another 6 months. And, it's unbelievable to me that so many people bought into this con artist, Donald Trump, who lied to people every day. And people just, they put their faith in this man who is so obviously a rich guy born with a silver spoon in his mouth that doesn't care about anybody but himself. And we got a lot of people buying into that. That is a huge problem. So this guy, he's a mass murderer, the way he handled this COVID crisis. And so, where are we on the vaccine? We're just starting to get it produced. And we got, concerns. Are these new variants going to be, the vaccine may not be as effective against the mutated variants. So we're going to be in a race against mutations. And the longer it takes to get people vaccinated and you have your herd immunity, the more opportunity the virus has to mutate into new forms. So we may end up in a situation like the flu vaccine, where you got to get it every year and they're anticipating what's effective, and it's kind of hit or miss. So I just think this whole COVID crisis is very serious, and people need to pay attention. And this is one area where it's a low bar, but Biden's doing a lot better than Trump.
And she clarified too in the chat, Howie, where she's asking, what is our position as a party on it?
Well, I think, we want people to get vaccinated. We also want to make sure that the FDA is doing proper evaluation. I mean, this was rushed through very fast in phase 3, where, a sample of people get vaccinated, then you see if there's side effects. It was done very quickly. So if there are long-term side effects, we may not know for a while, but they may be there. But on the other hand, COVID's pretty deadly. So, it's one of those things you got to make a judgment and, weigh the pros and cons.
And I think it's also just worth, stating that we are also aware of the history of medical apartheid, continuing history of medical apartheid in this country. And, there was a story that broke down here when they started offering, just the testing in the community that I currently live in, how hesitant people were, because it's a predominantly Black, predominantly working class, cash poor community, how hesitant they were to get tested. And then, how hesitant, members of certain communities have been around getting vaccinated. And I think that it's worth saying that we are aware of the history of medical apartheid in this country, the fact that it's ongoing, the fact that Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities have been horribly abused by the system. So, what I told my 81-year-old grandmother when she asked about it is, I trust you to do what you feel is best for you. If you think that being 81, if you feel that you should take it, I support you completely in this. But if, I want you to be aware of all the side effects and things that come with it too. So just do y'all's research and, make the best choices health-wise that are the best for you, that will keep you and your family safe.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Marcella Marie for her kind words. And I saw a question in there, which I know a lot of people have. She asked, how can you guys not be on the ballot in all states? How does that work? Well, there are 51 jurisdictions that have elections for electoral college votes, 50 states in the District of Columbia. And each state has its own ballot access rules. And so we went into the election with 21 states where we had ballot access. So we had to get 30 more petitions in. And for us, our convention, we got the nomination July 11th. Most of the deadlines came in July and August, and the last 3 were on September 4th. So we really had to scramble to get on the ballot, and we weren't successful in all the states. So that's how it works. Every state is different. Some states are pretty reasonable. Some states are near impossible. I see the next question. The guy says, we weren't on the ballot in Oklahoma. Yeah, we've never been on the ballot in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a huge petitioning requirement and a filing fee.
$35,000.
So we actually went to court over that filing fee. I think that case is still in process. So that's what it is. There's not, it's like most countries. If you're a recognized political party, you nominate and your candidate's on all the ballots. That's how it should be, but not in this country. And if you could look through the history, we didn't even have ballots for the first 100 years. And then parties would print up ballots, tickets, and people would put them in the voting booth. And then finally they did the Australian ballot, so the ballot would be secret. And that's where the government started printing the ballots. But it was pretty open until after World War I. The Socialist Party had a lot of success, so they started making ballot access harder. And there was another round during the McCarthy era, making ballot access harder. We've had some successes in the last few decades, but as you can see, we talked about New York earlier. Democrats felt they didn't want competition from the Green Party, So they changed the rules to make it really hard for us to get on the ballot. So that's how it works. 51 different election laws. It's very complicated to run for president. You got to figure out what the law is, what the petition form is, what the deadlines are, when the start dates are. You got to have this massive spreadsheet. It's a lot of research. Some of the secretaries of states and election commissions are not particularly forthright. The laws are often written very obscurely. If you ever read law, they'll always refer to other sections of the code. So then you got to look them up to see what they were talking about and what you were just reading. Very complicated. Shouldn't be that way.
Hey, Mike Oxmall is asking, do you think that Trump should be impeached?
He has been. Now he should be convicted. You know, and they got one article against him for inciting insurrection. And he did a lot of things right on that day, particularly obstructing a stronger security response once the Capitol was breached. And, you know, we'll see what evidence they bring to the trial. But man, this guy has a rap sheet a mile long. You know, from the first day, emoluments clause violations, campaign finance violations that Michael Cohen went to jail for, but the president couldn't be charged because he was president. New York is going after him for bank fraud, insurance fraud, tax fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, you know, with respect to Congress, obstruction of Congress. And it can go on and on. And, you know, my big disappointment is the Democrats didn't throw the book at him and explain how he was making things worse for consumers and workers and the environment, and build a case that would have mobilized public opinion so those Republican senators would have had to vote to convict him. Instead, they went on a narrow thing in the Ukraine. And the two charges were abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. But they made it sound like Ukraine, a national security issue, was the issue. Most people can't find Ukraine on the map. You know, that's not how you mobilize public opinion to get this guy convicted on impeachment. So we'll see how they do the second time. But I'm rooting for impeachment. But we'll see.
Hey, Mr. Anderson, you know I always think of the Matrix when I see your name, right? Has the Green Party met with the people of the Poor People's Campaign? What is the opinion on the Poor People's Campaign?
Well, I guess
now I'm assuming they're meaning Reverend Barber.
Well, that was my question. Which Poor People's Campaign?
Yeah.
We got a comrade, Sherry Honkala, that runs the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign.
Yes.
That is more in the spirit of Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. They are right now doing housing or, you know, building takeovers in Philadelphia, where there are a lot more units than there are homeless people. They could house the homeless in Philly with the housing they got. So they're forcing the issue in that respect. And Sherry had her birthday, and, you know, I was asked to say a few words, and I said, you know, your birthday's around Dr. King's birthday. And I think if he was alive today, he'd be out there with you taking over those homes instead of with Reverend Barber's Poor People's Campaign, which was praying that weekend for Joe Biden. And I said, if Dr. King preached to Reverend Barber's congregation, he would have said, here are the demands and here are the strategy, because the original Poor People's Campaign wasn't just praying. They were going to go to Washington for massive nonviolent direct action to get a response from Congress on an economic bill of rights, like Angela and I were campaigning on.
Yes.
Right to a job, to healthcare, education, and housing. That's what Dr. King was about. And you know, Reverend Barber's running mate, Reverend Liz Theohardis, I believe her name is.
I think so.
Yeah, she was an intern for Sherry Honkala back in the day. So I actually have talked to Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Barber Poor People's Campaign, here in New York went to their first action, which was very different than the original Poor People's Campaign. It was a march, kind of an orchestrated civil disobedience. They blocked some intersections. Cops knew they were going to do it. They just rerouted the traffic. And so they waited out the protesters that day. Later, they went into the Capitol, where I've been arrested, and the state troopers got that down to a science. Man, they can arrest you, arraign you, and have you out the door in 20 minutes. So it's not really disruptive. It's kind of a ritual. So, I think instead of praying for Biden and saying, please, sir, do this, that. For example, their healthcare proposal is let's improve the ACA so everybody has affordable healthcare. No, Medicare for all. That's what, they called it national health insurance back then. That's what Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign was demanding. So it's a spectrum of people talking around this Poor People's Campaign, but to me, it goes back to that Economic Bill of Rights that Dr. King was talking about, that FDR put on the table in 1944, 1945 in the State of the Union addresses. And here we are, what is it now? 76 years later, we still don't have any of those rights. And the Democrats, FDR's party, have had every president, Truman, LBJ, Carter, Clinton, and Obama, and now Biden, have had a majority in both houses and have not been able to get any of those rights legislated. So that says, something about what we can expect. So.
Hey, Mackenzie Lacey. If we moved up the nomination for the Green Party to earlier, would that help the issue of getting enough signatures for the petition? Could we do that for the next election?
Yes, we could. The other side of that is to qualify for the federal primary matching funds. The end date for qualified donations is the Green Party nomination day or any other state parties that have their own nomination that we're going for. So there's always a debate in the Green Party, how soon or how late. And there are pros and cons of both. In the past, we had a competitive primary this time. And so a lot of people withheld support in petitioning until very late. When Jill Stein was running in 2012 and 2016, she was the presumptive nominee. So a lot of states got started earlier. So you could have a late convention if we have a pretty good sense of who the nominee will be when the convention comes. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there. You just sort of got to, weigh all the factors and pick a date.
Kristen! Hi, Howie and Angela. What is one concrete goal members of the GP, Green Party, can accomplish in the next 6 months to advance the Green Party agenda?
Well, I will say too, I think ranked choice voting, there are a lot of campaigns in a lot of states. If we can get that, not only for, the statewide executive offices or citywide executive offices where it's a single seat, but also multi-seat elections for legislative bodies, that will be a game changer for us, because then the Green Party will not be seen as splitting votes away from the Democrats. And people feel pressured into voting for the Democrats as a lesser evil because they're scared as hell of the Republicans. The other goal I would say is set a goal for how many new members you can recruit to your local Green Party chapter. And then go out and reach out. Don't just go to the usual places, but reach out to new communities. We talked about deep canvassing here. We should be canvassing year round, talking to people, listening, building relationships, and then over time demonstrating by our activities in the community that we're with the people. And that's how we can win trust and support. And to do that, we need a mass base, not just a little cadre of activists.
Hey, Jean. And happy recent birthday, sweetheart. Have either of you been vaccinated for COVID-19? I have not.
I have not either. I'm qualified being over 65, but I can't get near a vaccine. There's just not enough of them around here.
And I have my own personal reasons for not going after it. I mean, I'm 47, and with the shortages around the country that are happening of people that absolutely should have access first responders, medical personnel, elders, children, whomever, folks who are immunocompromised. I'm not in any of those categories. So for me, it's not a priority. My work, I don't have people in my face. Also, my life is socially distant. So I'm not a priority as far as getting it. Violet. Hey, sweetheart. How do we get ranked choice voting? Is that decided in the state legislatures?
It's decided in the state legislature. It's decided in Congress.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Decided in city councils and county legislatures or commissions or whatever form you have. Depends on the state. I know in New York State, we can get it passed at the municipal level or the county level without a state constitutional amendment. Other states, that's not the case. So you've got to investigate, what your laws are. And there are organizations out there that can help you. Fairvote.org, been around for over 30 years, great information on their website. There's a newer group that's doing a lot of organizing. I'm involved in the New York campaign called Rank the Vote. And I've never seen so much energy for this reform. And I think coming out of the Trump years, where the Electoral College, I've said this before, I'll say it again. If as few as a little over, 21,462, if as few as that many people had voted for Trump instead of Biden in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, the Electoral College would have been tied, 269, would have gone to the House, where it's one state, one vote, and the Republicans have the majority of representatives from 30 states or 26 states. So the Electoral College would have installed Trump as president again, even though he lost the popular vote by 7.1 million votes. Given that, and a lot of people see that, they want to get rid of the Electoral College and go to a national popular vote. Even better would be a ranked choice national popular vote. So I think we got that going for us. We've passed ranked choice voting now in 38 cities and counties in 2 states. And there's a lot of momentum. There'll be more votes this year and next year. And if we keep building this momentum, I think we can get it. In fact, of all the reforms that are really game changers, I think this is the most likely we can get in Biden time. And that will open the door for the Green Party to be competitive, particularly if we insist on ranked choice voting from multi-seat districts for legislative bodies. There is a bill in Congress called the Fair Representation Act. You can ask your representative in Congress to co-sponsor that, bring it up in their town meetings or whatever they have, their town halls. They're all on Zoom now, and just keep pushing it. So I think right now we're in education mode. One thing Rank the Vote is big on is you want to build a big enough movement so when you do go to the state legislature, they got to listen to you. A lot of times us activists say, oh, we got a good idea. We find a sympathetic legislator and they say, sure, and they write the bill, but their heart isn't really in it. And sometimes they don't really know it. I had that experience with climate legislation here in New York. Green Party got some legislators to write up the bill. But when we go to news conferences, these state senators and assembly people, it was embarrassing when they answered the media's questions. They should have let us answer them because we knew the real answers. So it's better to have a movement, and then the politicians got to respond.
Hey, Matthew DX. If you want to win elections, you need to learn about rating-based voting methods such as approval, score, and star voting. Why is it so hard to get a conversation about this from Green leaders? And I've been advised that, this is one of our people.
Well, ranked choice voting is what people have been fighting for and winning. And now all of a sudden people want to go for these other things. We did approval voting in some of our primaries in the Green Party. It's complicated and people game it. You can't really set your preferences, or you got to game it. Approval voting, for example, means you vote for everybody you're satisfied with, and you don't vote for those you don't. But in a competition where you're electing one person, a lot of people say, I'm only going to vote for the one that I want the most. I'm not voting for the others. So they didn't even do the approval system. And then the math to allocate the result proportionally, it was very complicated. And the different states that did it, their math was different. It's why make it complicated? Star voting is like you got a 1 to 5 scale, and it just gets complicated. Ranked choice voting is easy as 1, 2, 3. The first person you like the most is 1. The next most is 2. The next most is 3. And the tabulation is very easy to understand. So, let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be. And this system of ranked choice voting is used in many places around the world: Australia, Ireland, Malta, and it's in the United States. There were like 50 cities that were using it, more than that, from the progressive era until basically what happened was black people started getting elected and leftists started getting elected. And in the McCarthy era, there's a big push to get rid of it. And they went back to, vote for one, majority or plurality wins. And what that does is magnify the power of the party with the most votes and underrepresents everybody else. It's very undemocratic. So ranked choice voting is a system that's worked. It's worked here. It's worked around the world. It's easy to understand. Let's get that done.
And we're getting the cane because it's about that time. Tatame, I see you out there. Tina, my homies, giving y'all love. All right, Howie, what are your final thoughts, Mr. President?
I didn't even have time to gather them. I felt like we're just getting started.
Well, I'll give you a half a second and give y'all the information that I would have forgotten because my mind is in a million places right now. We are going to have Kenneth Mejia next week. Those of y'all who have been asking us about where we are with down ballot candidates who are Greens who have won office in 2020. He is one of our folks, and he's going to be joining us next week to talk about his Los Angeles city controller race. We're very excited about that. He interviewed me very early on in our campaign. It was a really fun interview. He's good people, and so we are really looking forward to having him on to talk to y'all about what it was like to run that race, what he's looking at, what the lay of the land is for him as a Green in office in LA. Because a lot of people like to come at us sideways about not supporting down ballot candidates, which is absolutely not true. So, we have had down ballot candidates on before, and it's one of our goals, as this live stream goes on, to make sure that we're lifting those folks up. And I think my final thought is the controversy around putting the ancestor Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. And those of you who follow me on Twitter, those of you who follow me on Facebook know that I did not hold my tongue about that. Putting an elder, an ancestor who fought against the system of capitalism that enslaved her, that enslaved the people she loved, that enslaved the people she fought to liberate. You are not doing her an honor by putting her making her the face of the system that was responsible for her enslavement. It's absolutely garbage. It's performative BS, tantamount to, folks kneeling in kente cloth or making, Black Lives Matter plaza. If y'all want to honor Harriet Tubman properly, We need Medicare for all right now. We need a federal jobs guarantee right now. We need reparations for African Americans right now. We need housing for all right now. We need the implementation of the Green New Deal as we wrote it right now. If you want to put some teeth in honoring the liberator Harriet Tubman, putting her face on a $20 bill that's not how you honor her. Liberate people, give people the means to live with dignity. And if you can't do that, then keep her name out your mouth. So that's where I am with that. And I want y'all to stay safe. Like Howie said, COVID ain't playing, it's mutating, things are happening. I don't want y'all scared. I want you to be observant. I want you to continue to take care of yourselves and your families, whomever y'all love, in every way that you know how. Eat well when you can, rest well when you can, keep your stress level as much as you can. And just know that we are paying attention. We are right here with y'all. So, and Howie?
Well, I agree. You cannot substitute symbolic gestures for real policies. But I know some of Harriet Tubman's ancestors around here. They'd be honored to have her on a $20 bill. She's a big improvement over Andrew Jackson, who should not be honored. To me, getting rid of the military bases named after traitorous Confederate generals that were bad generals anyway is something we should do. It's not all we should do. Let me just leave it at that. And the other thing I would say is, before you get on next week, check out Kenneth Mejia's Facebook page. It's one of the best ones around. It's got a lot of substance on it, stuff about what's going on in Los Angeles and his race. And I think that would be worth your while before we get on the call next week. So y'all have a safe week, and we'll see you next week.